Joining us now to help answer that question is the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Cliff May. Cliff, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be with you guys.
Great. So, Cliff, just right off the bat with the UN Security Council resolution today, what are the enforcement mechanisms? They can make a resolution, but how can they get Bashar al-Assad to abide by it?
As you pointed out, it's also a non-binding resolution. There are no enforcement mechanisms. It's not worth very much. It's barely worth whatever paper it's printed on. It won't do a whole lot of good. And I have very little faith in Kofi Annan as a diplomat or as an intermediary in this case. So Assad will continue to do the killing he's been doing because he will do whatever it takes, he feels, to hold on to power, and he thinks those that are supporting him are more loyal and more helpful than those who were supporting the opposition. So
do you think it makes any difference that it seems that Russia and China have changed their position on the issue?
They've changed it just a little bit. I think maybe it's possible, just possible, they're a bit queasy about the kind and the extent of the killings that have been taking place. We're talking about a minimum 7,500, probably 9,000. Though some estimates it's a lot more than that. We're talking about women and children being killed, perhaps journalists being purposefully targeted. We're talking about massive torture taking place in the country. They may be getting a little queasy, and they would like to see a ceasefire if it leaves Assad in place. That's very much certainly what the Russians want. The Chinese have been a little more difficult to read in this.
Hey, let me ask you this. This is Will Kane, by the way. What do we want to happen in Syria? What is the outcome that we would like to see happen?
The outcome we should want to see is for Assad to fall. And the president has said that on a number of occasions, so has Hillary Clinton, although there's been some backtracking of late. But the Assad regime is, first of all, the most important client of Iran. It is Iran's bridge into the Sunni world and into the Arab world. Assad has been the host of Hamas. It has been the patron of Hezbollah. Assad has facilitated al-Qaeda terrorists into Iraq while Americans were there killing Americans, and did so by the hundreds. We should want to see Assad fall, both because he deserves it, but strategically because of the impact that would have on Iran. It would be very damaging for Iran, and right now it is in our interest to damage Iran.
All right, that's great, Cliff. I think all that's probably spot on correct, but we're not worried about what rises in Assad's place?
Oh, I think we are worried. I think everybody's worried. I think the Israelis are worried, as you mentioned, although I think when you on balance, the devil we know is not better than the devil we don't know. On balance, although you can't predict what's going to happen, it could look like Egypt, I suppose, although I think the chances are a little better here that it won't, and I can explain why. I think Assad is so bad and the Iranians are such a threat. They're the most important national security threat we face, and an existential threat to Israel, and a threat, by the way, to the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and other small nations in that region. Kuwait would be another one. That for all those reasons, you take the gamble and you say, no, we don't want Assad at this point to survive. If Assad survives, that is a great victory for Iran and a great victory for his despotism. It also means that in the so-called Arab Spring, I don't like the phrase, only those dictators who have cooperated with or been pro-American will have fallen. Not one who is anti-American will have fallen. That'll be a very big lesson to teach as well.
Hey, Cliff, Buck Saxton here. I just wanted to ask you, so we want Assad gone, but would you agree, I think that the consensus at this table would tend to be that the best outcome would be Assad falling with an absolute minimal output of U.S. effort or involvement. Is that where you are, or would you like to see a more robust, possibly even kinetic U.S. involvement in Syria?
No, I absolutely agree with that, and I should mention I sat this morning at breakfast with a Syrian general who has defected, one of 7 or 8 who have now defected from the regime. They don't want to see American boots on the ground whatsoever. They would like to see maybe a no-fly zone, maybe some safe areas for refugees. They would like to get weapons so they can fight back, some humanitarian aid, communications technology, medical assistance. They don't want Americans in there to do it for them. They just want some help at a time when Iran is providing all sorts of assistance, including special forces, and of course the Russians have been too. In fact, there are we have good reports that the Russians have sent in special forces as what they're calling advisors. So they want some help, but no, maybe like something like what we did in Libya would be fine. They say if we got involved in Libya, and the Europeans did, out of humanitarian reasons, the humanitarian crisis that Benghazi faced is small at this point compared to what they're facing right now in Syria. So no American help on the ground, but yes, there is equipment and other things that we could be supplying covertly or overtly, and we don't seem to be doing so.
So, Cliff, just to follow up on that, you spoke with the Syrian general defector just this morning. Why did he defect, and does he think that the Syrian opposition could take down Assad by themselves independently without any of this Western assistance?
He defected, as others have, because the Assad regime is so bad and so oppressive and so much of a puppet of Iran at this point that he doesn't feel he could possibly continue to serve that regime.
Was it the horror of Syria's actions against the civilians right now? Because presumably Assad was, tyrannical, despotic, and crushing opposition up until the civil unrest.
Yes, there's no question, but I can't tell you what straw broke the camel's back in this case, but he did speak movingly about what the humanitarian crisis that's taking place because of the killing by the regime indiscriminately and, in fact, targeting women and children, really a terrorist campaign. What he said is that this regime is going to go on and continue to kill unless they're stopped, but the people of Syria, he believes, will continue to fight, and they will not give up. He'd like to see this come to an end sooner, but he thinks the best way to do that is by empowering the opposition at this point, and that's what he'd like to see, and he'd like to see it along the lines that I explained.
Cliff, Jedediah here. I have a question for you. If Assad were to hold on to power, how does he envision ruling over a country that's so divided at this point? I just don't see a path for him to maintain power and effectively rule, given what's happening in the country right now and moving ahead.
Well, he'll rule through oppression, which is the way he's ruled before. He'll rule by dividing and conquering, as he has before. But that's also why I see some hope in a post-Assad regime. Unlike Egypt, unlike a lot of other countries in the region, Syria is very split, which can be a good thing, because what you should have after Assad are the various populations, the ethno-religious groups, coming together and saying, how do we manage to get along? You have some Shia, you have some Sunni, you have an Alawite minority. That's what Assad is, and he's been in power all this time for the past 30, 40 years, including his father. You have Christians, you have Druze, who are really quite distinct from others. You have the Kurds, who are distinct. It's not going to be easy to bring these people and these various peoples into a coalition, but it's possible, and if you did, and if they were focusing on making Syria a better country for all of these groups, then there would be less belligerence towards outsiders, and also they wouldn't be the kind of cat's paw for Iran that they are right now, the kind of supporter for Hezbollah, which is oppressing Lebanon, or for Hamas, which we know. Now, it's an interesting and odd thing here, that at this point, Israel, Hamas, both are on the same side in that both want to see Assad fall. But, of course, there'll be all sorts of groups who want to be influential after Assad falls, if he does, none more so than, say, the Turks and the Saudis and others. If the U.S. is involved in some way, we have a better shot, no guarantee, that we can be influential in a post-Assad environment.
Cliff, Matt Welch here. How did the U.S. putting the thumb on its scale in Libya affect the situation now in Syria, and how do you think it's going to affect things going forward in other positions in the kind of the so-called Arab Spring?
Well, I've heard this from a lot of Syrians, that because the U.S. got involved in Libya the way it did, because it saw the humanitarian crisis and said we have to act, the Syrians thought, well, surely the same will apply to us. A Syrian life can't be worth less than a Libyan life. And so there's some frustration and anger that they thought they understood a principle, and the principle doesn't seem to apply to Syria as it did to Libya, even though strategically, geostrategically, Syria is a much more important country than is Libya. That's created some frustration.
Well, Cliff, let me follow up and sort of end this on the question that, while you can certainly understand the Syrians' frustration that Americans are not coming to their rescue, a lot of Americans at this point feel like we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. We went into Iraq, we helped rebuild that country, now they seem to be gravitating towards Iran, there are machinations there. Afghanistan, we're seeing our president burned in effigy. In Libya, we saw, Al-Qaeda flags being waved, as well as in Egypt. What does the United States get out of this, consider this very mixed record in the Middle East?
It's a great question, and let me try to answer it this way. We are damned if we do, and we are damned if we don't. So what we have to do is what's in the U.S. interest. And often that means choosing the least worst option. Not the best option, because there isn't any, but the least worst option. And in this case, I think it's pretty clear strategically that Assad should fall There's a humanitarian consideration, yes, but the most important reason is because of the impact on Iran. Iran is run by a regime that is building nuclear weapons, the world's leading supporter of terrorism. It has promised that a world without America is attainable. It has promised to wipe Israel off the map. From an American point of view, we do want Assad to fall. Now, these other situations you talked about, you're right, although this is for a longer discussion. If we leave Iraq precipitously, guess what's going to happen? The Iranians who are next door are going to influence that situation. There's a reason we still have troops in Germany, still have troops in Korea and other places in the world after wars, because that's how you maintain your influence over the long run. Similarly with Afghanistan, all kinds of bad things, but there are some people there, many, who would like to see the Americans stay for a while until they can protect themselves. Everybody there is not trying to kill Americans. The problem is if you say, we're going to be out of here in 14 months, or whatever it is, then what's going to happen is nobody wants to be on your side because they know what's going to happen when you leave. They will be left alone. They will be targeted. They will be killed. So that's why you need a larger strategy. You can't just talk about winding wars down. You have to think about why you're going into a place and what you're going to do over the long run. And we have not done this coherently or cohesively over the last few years.
Well, we appreciate your insights into it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thanks, Cliff. So why